Hi, and welcome back to Relative Recovery, the podcast on chronic illness, healing, and recovery unfiltered. Just a reminder to hit that subscribe button and follow along. We really appreciate you being here. We are now in March, which is Brain Injury Awareness Month, Lauren's favorite month of the year. And so we're going to take a break from some of our dysautonomia content and bring it back to the roots here and really talk about concussion, brain injury, and some new research in that area, which Lauren is going to educate us on. So today, Lauren and I were just chatting about how unfortunately relevant this topic may be to us as our parents are aging, and we wanted to talk about concussions in aging and older adults. We know that older adults are particularly at risk for falls, and some of our listeners, may have dealt with this themselves or with their own parents. And a lot of times I think we treat the physical injuries, the visible injuries, and concussion, head injury can kind of get overlooked, right, Lauren? So we wanted to kind of unpack that today and hopefully give you some tools if this is relevant to you.
Well, it has to be relevant to them. It has to be relevant because people over the age of 65 are the largest population in the United States. So if you're a U.S. listener, and then the population is actually going to double by the age by 2060. So there were 46 million older adults back in 2014, but people live longer and ideally healthier. And so we'll actually have 98 million people over the age of 65 by the time we hit 2060. So a pretty relevant conversation, unless you live, I don't know, like in a single cell somewhere or something like that, and you don't have any relatives, but otherwise you interact with older people all day long. And it was really funny because I did a little ditty on social about older adults and falls a little while ago, and my dad writes to me and he says, wait a minute, over 65 is an older adult? That makes me an older adult. And I was like, yeah, you're 71 years old. Like, you are. The day you got your Medicare card, you were officially an older adult. So congratulations on not being self-aware for the last 6 years.
I think it's just that maybe you and your sisters and Charlie are really keeping him young,
I love it, right? He's knock on wood, healthy and active, and he exercises. So I love that he doesn't self-identify as what we might stereotypically think of as an older adult, but it was just of the things he could take away from that post. It was the moment of him having an aha about his birth year was the best thing ever.
I love it. I mean, we all feel that way when we hit 65. Wait, what?
That does actually wrap into, we talked a while ago about health behavior change and perceived severity and perceived susceptibility. So it's actually really interesting that he said that, because basically that would be just further evidence that humans drastically underestimate their perceived severity and perceived susceptibility, right? He doesn't even realize that he's in this risk factor group. 1 in 4 adults, older adults, every year will have a fall. A fall is the leading cause of injury and preventable death in older adult population. And he has been living his life not even realizing that the risk is there, which is great. We don't want him to live in fear, but also we want him to keep exercising. We want him to stay healthy. We want him to stay confident, because all of those things are going to lower his risk of being in that 25% of older adults that are going to have a fall.
Yeah, totally. And so have you had a conversation with him since? Is he making any changes?
I mean, you have met Dave, right? We're currently working on drinking more than a sip of water every day. So we're really no. Yeah. I mean, he's actually doing, I'm not going to blow too much smoke up his rear end and tell him how great he is, but he he's my whole life has gone to the gym regularly. Yeah. COVID kind of took him out of his swing for a while, but just the pandemic itself, not being sick with it. But he as a child, it was instilled in us that we went to the gym. We went to the gym as a family, which is a foreign concept to your family, but
so not my experience.
we had a gym membership, and like we would go to the gym together and do like our own separate routines and stuff. And so like, no, he's always been very active. He's always exercised. We've talked about adding more cardio, things like that, but he's just kind of going to do what he's going to do. So I try to drop little nuggets. I think he has learned more from my social media than he has from any conversation we've ever had. And I don't care. Like, that is totally fine with me. If he likes that version of me as an educator, I'm okay with that.
Right. You need that like one level removed. No, we definitely didn't grow up exercising like that. I mean, we did activities. But I will say my parents are pretty good. They've been going to the gym themselves, and last I heard, my mom's been drinking her glass of milk a day because the doctor said it was important. So I'm glad for that, because my mom completely is not aware of her risk for sure. She would tell me, oh God, I hope she's not gonna watch this, but yeah, she would tell me she's totally fine, not at risk, gonna be fine. Yeah. I don't think she's gonna take like any precautions, but I do think she's, trying to be conscious of her health and fitness in general. But, like driving the pickup down to help me like pick out and unload a couch for my new apartment, for sure. Like, she's raising her hand to volunteer to do that. I'm just like, at what point do I suggest like we should probably hire some people?
When do we stop getting on a ladder? Like, when does that
Yeah, when do we
conversation
stop getting
happen?
on a ladder?
So that, I mean, it's funny, right, to a certain extent, but falls actually cost about $50 billion in the United States. It's pretty crazy. The cost for TBI, so TBI is one of the most common hip fractures, of course, but TBI, brain injury, is one of the most common side effects from a fall. And those actually, the numbers that we have are from 2003, so they're pretty old, but the $2.2 billion annually back then. And then remember that the population has increased in size, and so these numbers just are slow to come out when you need to get access to them. But basically, they cost us a fortune. And then if you think about this other piece, right? If you're over 65, you're on Medicare.
Yeah.
So it's this huge cost, and it's from some of our best healthcare, but some of our socialized healthcare programs. So it's a big cost that you and I are paying, that the older generations paid into throughout their working career, but we are actually the ones sustaining it with the income that we're earning. And so it becomes not only that we're worried, so it's sometimes very little in comparison, but like you sometimes think about like, oh, okay, it's just Betty, to think of somebody that I would think of that would have a name that would be 80 or 90 years old, right? But it could be that it's your 66-year-old who skis 100 days a year and they have a fall. So a fall isn't only when we think of frailty, but a fall could also be an older adult who's playing pickleball 4 days a week and they twist and they fall down, right? And so the stronger that we are, the more active that we are, the better we can absorb these things. But falls aren't unique to frailty. It can happen in an instant. You turn your head stepping off of a curb and things like that. And so the stronger you are, the more robust your bone structure is, the better you're going to be able to absorb those hits.
Yeah, so like in addition to, physical fitness and building up a bit of that resilience, what should people be aware of? Why do falls kind of happen generally? And what should people kind of look out for with this age group in particular?
I mean, there's things called, well, first you might want to talk about like modifiable risk factors, right? So there's like normal aging, and we want to stay active and healthy and get that 150 minutes of cardio a week and do your strength training and work on your balance. So prevention measures. But there's also just modifiable risk factors. Do you drink enough water, right? Does Dave have 1 sip of water a day, or is he staying hydrated? What does your home environment look like? Like, I mean, our parents, again, we're very lucky, but they're active, they're relatively healthy, right? So to start to have a conversation with them about throw rugs in their home and their level of resistance, right? Like, they don't want to see that that's a part of their reality now, but like, do they have night lights to go towards the bathroom, right? Like a healthy 65-year-old, 65 today is like 85, 30 years ago, right? Like, people are just healthier now in some respects and much less healthy in others. But we live longer. And so it's hard to start to have these conversations. We went camping with a family member who's older than Mom and Jean. And I walked into her RV, and it was the cutest thing ever. It was like in 1970s, was living there. And there were throw rugs on top of throw rugs. And I lost my ever loving mind. And I was like, so and so, what are you doing? I mean, because she's got to be 10 or 12 years older than mom, easy. And so I'm like, what are you doing? You cannot be walking in the dark in your camper with your dog with throw rugs on top of throw rugs. It's like, you're going to break your neck in here. And her response was, I die doing something I love. She just like did.
So she's not going to remove the rugs.
She's not going to get rid of her rugs. So these are real modifiable risk factors that are around us all of the time. But, we have to start having these conversations to keep them nice and safe and healthy.
Yeah, it's true. I know. And it's hard. Like, I don't want to get rid of my area rugs.
And by the way, I trip over my throw rugs constantly.
Yeah.
So if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. But so just kind of talking about those things. The other big piece about modifiable risk factors would be medications. So as we get older, we tend to be on more medications. People tend to get up more in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. So there's actually a criterion called the AGS Beers criteria, spelled like beers, like a Coors Light or something, not sponsored. And so you could do something called the AGS Beers criteria, and you can actually go through your meds and see if any have side effects that could make you dizzy or have you be off balance. Oh. And then you can work with your doctor and a pharmacist to come up with maybe a different regimen if you are having dizziness or balance impairments, because that's not just the normal cost of aging. So it's another big thing is people feel like, oh, I'm just like dizzy and a little off balance, but that's normal. Mm-hmm. And just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So if a person is having dizziness or balance impairments, what's really cool is that early intervention works. So there was a study that came out by Marmor et al. In 2023, and we have that in our Substack, the citation for that. But what's really cool is if you had an older adult, a person over 65, who had dizziness or balance problems, and you put them in skilled services like vestibular rehab, even community programs scored really well. So like a Step Right program or Step Up or things like there's community run public health programs. There's an 86% reduction in fall risk. So the minute someone is saying that they're dizzy or you're starting to notice that their balance is going, early intervention is better. 86% reduction. Like, think of how much of that $50 billion a year starts to drop in the bucket, how much more Medicare there is left for us maybe in the long run if we're not just throwing money out the window.
I'm not holding my breath.
Over preventable causes. Think about like what would it be like for you if when your mom is complaining about, I don't know, like she's dizzy or something, like how would that conversation go for you think, if you were to talk to her about it?
Oh, I would not be able to talk to her about it. But I mean maybe you could. But yeah, I mean, she mentions certain things every now and then. I think, the nice thing about my mom is she's not really going to take my advice all the time per se, but she will hear things after the fact and, try something new. So, like I said, like she's been going to the gym, she's doing her weightlifting, she wants to make her bones strong, which is great. And, it's a goal of mine as well. Once I get my apartment in order and I have room to pull the weights out.
I want to keep us a little bit tight on this one today. So let's get back into head injuries. So falls are going to be the most common cause of traumatic brain injury in older adults. And then 70% of head-related injuries are internal, meaning like it's not a skull fracture, it's not obvious, it's this it's this disruption inside of your head. The most common thing, of course, is the hip fractures. Like you hear about hip fractures all the time. That tends to actually be a predictive factor of negative outcomes in the long term. So older adults also tend to have more severe brain injuries, but they do get concussions. So there's this really interesting problem that we're having right now with public health, where we are looking for traumatic brain injuries, big brain injuries in older adults, bleeds, skull fractures, things like that. We know that they get injuries that lead to death more often, right? But we're kind of forgetting about the fact that they also can have a mild traumatic brain injury. They also can have normal concussion symptoms. And in this population specifically, those concussion symptoms get conflated with age-related changes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's important.
Like I walk into the room and I forget why I went there, but I'm 72.
Right,
Is what a
right.
patient might say, right? Or, yeah, I mean, I get a little dizzy now after I play pickleball, but I mean, I am 69, so like maybe that's normal. This is real things that patients will say, right?
Mhm.
They might say something like, yeah, I slowed down a little bit at the gym, but I don't really think it's related to my fall, or I don't think it's related to my mountain biking accident. I just think, a lot of my friends at 73 are starting to slow down. And then if you challenge them a little bit, they might also be able to finish that sentence with, but actually, I have some friends who are older than me that are out skiing me on the hill too, right? And so if you can
Yeah,
get them to start to reflect on that, not as this general perceived social norm of just like, oh, this is just part of aging and then I die, I guess, right? But I'll say to a patient, like, well, okay, your injury was 59 days ago. What were you like 60 days ago? Were you getting lost walking into a room 60 days ago? Were you not keeping up with your mountain biking group 60 days ago? Like, our goal should be that you get back to the Susie that you were 60 days ago, and maybe a little
yeah,
better, because a lot of people can
yeah.
actually benefit from therapy just in general.
Well, that's true too.
Our brains can continue to get sharper if we target them. So just because they've had a head injury, that doesn't mean, or a concussion or whatever it is, it doesn't
Yeah,
mean that they have to continue to get slower over time. But also we want to be true, we want to be honest about the effects of aging, right? So like as a person gets to be 65 and older, their actual cells slow down in how well they repair and the speed with which they repair. That's why there's always talk about longevity. Like, oh, if you take this supplement or this face cream and your longevity is going to improve. Like, probably not, honestly. You probably should have started 20 years ago. But the normal effects of aging, just because human beings live longer in our skin suits than we ever have before because of modern medicine, right? And we don't die of cholera at such a high rate and things like that. And so we now have to deal with this epigenetic change that happens as the body slows down. And the second half of that sentence is, if you continue to exercise, if you continue to do brain games and you continue to do cognitive challenges, if you stay engaged in your community, which is actually a huge part of social determinants of health for older adults, you can improve the rate or at least slow the slide of these natural effects of aging. So the more sedentary we are, the worse these effects are going to be.
yeah,
If you think post concussion, you have this exercise intolerance or you have a lack of confidence. A lack of confidence with balance is a huge predictor of falling, right? And so you
hmm,
become more sedentary. The more sedentary you become, the more those effects of aging start to take over. So it really is so important for so many different reasons that we screen our older adults for concussion and that we actually treat them, because now we're looking at this ripple effect, right? I throw the stone in the water and their sedentary nature and their fear of falling, and then the effects on their bone density, the effects
yeah,
on their mitochondria, right? All of these things, the neurogenesis in their brain, they're actually way that their brain connections are changing over time, is all impacted by something that we're just simply missing because we don't believe that it's a problem or we don't believe that they can get better. How terrible is that as like a
yeah.
public health measure? We work so hard to combat smoking, but we really aren't
Hmm.
working that hard to improve this aging process in real ways, not in, clickbait ways, but in real meaningful ways for this
Yeah,
population that's going to cost us a fortune because they are the biggest
yeah,
population.
yeah, for sure. I mean, we watched that happen with my grandma when she had her back surgery. She was super motivated to do her physical therapy and be able to make it to my college graduation in 2014. And that was it. That was like her last motivator. And then the fear of falling took over. And it went from fear of falling, I think, to, well, nothing's that important that I need to go do. And it became just sitting in her chair. And she's been in a wheelchair now for a long time. She was on a walker, for a time after the surgery, but she never got back off of a walker, which she could have done if she'd worked on it, probably. I mean, I don't know. Again, clinically, I don't know, but I think she probably should have been able to do that at least for a few years in there. She was already almost 80, so um, it's all we think of it as like really is valid, right? Like she's older, oh, she doesn't want to walk to the post office anymore, walk to the wherever she used to walk. It probably wasn't very much. She was never like a big exerciser, but even to walk to the car. And thank God, because we didn't want her driving. But yeah, I
Conversation
mean,
for
yeah,
another day.
that's a conversation for another day. But yeah, I mean, and you just like kind of tell yourself it's normal, or like kind of go along with it, because she's comfortable. She's more comfortable not trying and not falling, right? And then the family has some peace of mind too. Like, well, if she's not falling, we don't have to worry about her falling, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about frailty at that point, which is actually a medical term,
For sure.
but and her health behavior part, when we did our motivation podcast and we talked about human health behavior, like you can't want that for her. You could
Right.
introduce, right? So she's in the pre-contemplation stage. She doesn't even think it's a reality for her. She doesn't have a goal that she's working for. She just kind of
Yeah.
sees the other people in her older adult community who are in the same boat. And so her perceived social norm is like, this is just the way it is. So in that point, it would be introducing this type of education. Like, hey, I get it. Your symptoms are more severe, right? At least in the concussion population, we know that their symptoms are more severe. They have more vulnerability to injury. They have more repeat injuries. They take longer to get better. And then there's cognitive impairment. So there's actually something called agnosia, and this affects older adults quite often. Vestibular agnosia is actually a person who's dizzy who can't feel that they're dizzy. They have a balance impairment that they're not aware of, right? And so if we start to pile in these things and she doesn't have that motivating factor to get her to do them, we have to actually just start with education. We have to acknowledge all of those truths. And here are the little pieces that we can do to solve these problems, right? Yes, you're going to put on muscle mass slower than Joelle is. But if you don't try at all, you're going to lose muscle mass faster than Joelle is. Right? So it takes more effort to put it on and it's easier to lose it. So the stronger you go into the process, the more of a buffer that you actually have to absorb an injury like this, right? So like Dave, who's gone to the gym forever and his muscles are conditioned to know what to do at the gym, is going to be able to absorb a hit better than a woman of the same age who was taught women glow and glisten, we don't sweat, right? So her normative value, like my mom didn't grow up going to the gym. That wasn't like a thing women did in the 70s and the 60s, right? And so like her body doesn't have that same just memory and response. She does her yoga and stuff, but that's different, right? And that's a newer thing for her later in life. But for your grandma or for older adults who have frailty, it starts to really layer and become complicated, and you have to really meet them where they're at, or we end up giving up because we feel like I'm not going to fight with grandma anymore about this.
Yeah.
I don't want to push my thoughts onto grandma. I don't want to beat up grandma emotionally because she's not trying hard enough.
She's just not going to listen.
I don't want to deal with her. It's like talking to the wall.
That's another conversation.
So thank you all for joining in with us today as we started to introduce this concept of older adult. What is an older adult? What their health complications are and falls. And then we're going to unpack adults over the age of 18. So the research actually just kind of says like 18 and up, but there are other subgroups. So there's the menopausal group, there's older adults. And so don't worry, we're going to talk about intervention types and unique thoughts to have when we're treating patients with concussion who are in these age groups, and we'll chunk those out over time. So please keep coming back. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for taking the time and spending it with us. We really appreciate it.